Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I am your host, Jim Gramm. Joining me shortly will be my co-host, Kayla Baity, as we dive into UFC 224, Bellator 199, Glory 53 was this past weekend in the world of professional kickboxing, and we also have the first ever non-Brazilian South American event for the Ultimate Fighting Championship, that being UFC Chile, which features Kamaru Usman against Damian Maia in the main event of the evening. We'll talk about that, plus major headlines in the world of mixed martial arts, including the UFC signing a deal with ESPN to be on their brand new streaming app called ESPN Plus, what that means for the organization, what that means for UFC Fight Pass, and of course what that means for us fans and viewers of mixed martial arts, and more importantly, the UFC. And of course, anything else that may pop up here, and any other questions that you have, please go down below to talk to myself, Jim Gramm, and of course my co-host Kayla Baity, as we are live once again here on MMA World Facebook page. It's facebook.com/MMA World with 2 extra D's. And we're also live on our sister page, MMA UK. That's facebook.com/Mixed Martial Arts UK. Also on Twitter at We Are MMA UK and Instagram. And then same thing on Twitter and Instagram for MMA World. That's at MMA World with the 2 extra D's. I'm your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. As again, my co-host Kayla Baity will be joining me here shortly as we are live once again. And thanks everybody for joining me. Again, jam-packed week here coming up of mixed martial arts, so a lot to cover, and really excited to be doing that. All right, so UFC 224, that's where we're going to start here on the program. That's was this past weekend. That was over in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. 5 fights were shown on the pay-per-view main card. And I went 3-2 overall in my picks, so not great, but not, amazingly bad either. And overall, for a card that, at least in all initial reports, might be the worst bought pay-per-view in UFC history at under 100,000 buys, I actually thought was a pretty solid card in terms of actually what we got to see, what was entertaining, and everything. So very excited for them. Very excited by the fights, considering, again, only 10,000 people were in attendance, less than 100,000 buys. But we'll get into that here as I welcome in Kayla Baity, my co-host, as usual, here for Beyond the Cage.
Hey.
Kayla, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. It's a nice sunny day. I just I worked the early shift at my other gig, my non-mixed martial arts gig. But I had to eat lunch real quick before I came on, so I'm feeling good now. I'm feeling fed, hydrated, and all that good stuff. I get to relax a little bit here.
Oh man, well my day's just starting and I have to get to work soon, so I'm a little envious, but that's good. I'm glad you get to enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, so as I was telling everyone, we got a lot of stuff to cover. We're kicking it off with UFC 224. From what and Miles Painter, thanks for joining us once again. He'll be helping us out with the comments, making sure we don't miss anything, and making sure everyone's questions heard. So again, comment down below any questions or comments, and we'll get to them as the program moves along. But this is a pay-per-view where a lot of people were not that thrilled with. Initial reports are saying it's going to do under 100,000 buys, which will be on record for being the worst pay-per-view in like UFC history, or one of the worst pay-per-views in UFC history. But the action that we saw, Kayla, I mean, was pretty fantastic. We saw only 2 decisions for the whole night. Everything else was a finish. I mean, you can't really complain.
And Vitor Belfort's last fight,
yeah,
do none of the veteran, fans of MMA care?
Yeah,
to show their support.
Yeah, that too. So, I mean, it kicked off, on Fight Pass with Marcus Perez against James Bochnikovic. Hope I said, well, he lost. He got submitted by rear naked choke in the first round. That's how we kicked things off. Then Alberto Mina ended up losing to Ramazan MV. Then we saw man, this was a back and forth fight between Jack Hermansson and Talis Leites. It looked like Talis Leites was starting to kind of take over. It looked like he probably had won the first 2 rounds. You know, Hermansson had a couple of brief instances, but for the most part, this was Talis Leites' fight. Going into the 3rd round, Hermansson looked like he may have been hurt. There was a point in the 2nd round where Hermansson was really grimacing a lot with things on his legs, but he got up for the 3rd round. You see him kind of sell out on this guillotine choke to start the 3rd round. I was kind of like, dude, you know you're not going to. Talis Leites is one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. You're not going to catch him with a guillotine choke. You know what I mean? Like, so right. you could tell. I think it was just that level of desperation, knowing that if this goes to a decision, I'm probably not going to win. And I think too, he had to be hurting, even though he was kind of shaking it off. He's like, man, I don't know if I could last. If I get hit my leg or something, I might not be able to finish the match, and I'm going to lose, you know, by default. So, yeah, so he tries to sell out on this guillotine. It doesn't work out. Leites kind of falls out of it and then kind of does some lazy things with his guard. Maybe that drained him more than he thought, or maybe he was just too tired. But Hermansson then was able to take mount and then pound him out and get a knockout victory. I thought, considering the injury, the quality of the grappling opponent, and the way he was able to come back, in my opinion, down 2 rounds to none in Brazil, you know, late his home country, I thought this was a really big victory for Jack Hermansson, and I think it shows what type of like heart, grit, and determination this guy has.
Yeah, for sure. I unfortunately didn't get to watch, like, the only fight that I was able to catch on this was Dern versus Cooper. So thank you for painting the picture of this fight for me. But yeah, for sure. I mean, that's just adding to what you said in the beginning, the fact that we only got 2 decisions and we got to see performances like this.
Yeah, this was one of them.
You know,
so if you got Fight Pass, I go and check this one out because it kind of blew my mind. Kind of how Leites, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. He kind of gets on his back, he throws his legs up, and then I'm not particularly sure what he was going for, but it's almost kind of like Hermansson like walks right into mount, basically. It was kind of incredible. Then we saw Zaleski dos Santos with his 5th win in a row. This guy's like come out of nowhere, knocking out Sean Strickland, a very tough dude. Very impressed with ZDS. Very impressed with him. David Ramos beats the very tough Nick Hines, submitting him in the 1st round. And then Alexei Olenek, my goodness, Kayla, you know the guy has the Ezekiel choke. He seems to be the only guy in mixed martial arts who not only goes for this, but actually gets it. This is a very difficult move to pull off without a gi. As a guy who trains in a gi, even in a gi, it can be hard to pull off. So the fact that he can do it without a gi, and he actually almost got this one standing, Kayla, because they
I saw the highlights of
yeah, they kind of get into the clinch. He puts his arm around Junior Albini, and you kind of see him go like this to feed it back through standing. And while like this, Albini trips and takes him down, but Olenek doesn't care because he already knows he can get the submission. So Albini trips, takes him down. Then you see Olenek pass the arm in front, press the forearm in the throat, and he gets the tap like 15 seconds later. It's his 11th Ezekiel choke in mixed martial arts, and I don't know anyone else who even has one. This is crazy.
Right. I didn't know that he has 11.
Yeah.
That's insane.
And I think this was like his 40. I think he has like 50 some odd victories. This was like his 42nd or 43rd submission victory, which is ridiculous. So he has like an 85% submission finish rate. And I think of those 40 some odd submission victories, it's 11 different submission combinations. So yes, he has a lot of Ezekiel chokes, but 11 different combinations of finishes. So it's not like he's a one-trick pony. This shows you this guy is well-versed in submissions. And for Junior Albini, like I said, he kind of walked right into it. He would have been better off not taking the fight to the ground and getting that top position, because if you're standing, you can kind of punch the body, you can get some leverage, you can put him up against the cage. But once it kind of went to the ground, I was like, he's done. Once he tripped him, he kind of sealed his own fate there.
And the fact that he's getting it from, like you said, almost a standing position. That's what's crazy is, unless, like you said, maybe you're performing and training in mixed martial arts, you don't know what kind of a treat it is to watch someone like him perform. And that's what's so crazy, is that you're saying this card,
Yeah.
didn't get many views or buys. If we have people like him on the card, people should immediately be jumping to watch him perform.
Yeah, at one point, Kale, we had 4 consecutive first-round finishes.
I mean, that's crazy.
Then
I'm mad that I missed this card.
Yeah, and then Cesar Fajeda, everyone was talking about Carl Robeson. I was talking about Carl Robeson, another guy, much like Israel Donashe, coming over from Glory, undefeated in mixed martial arts. But Cesar Fajeda, another guy, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was able to get the fight to the ground, and he's just at a different skill set than Carl Robeson, and was able to use his big size. I mean, he's such a big middleweight. It's still crazy to me that he somehow, for one fight, got down to welterweight. I don't know how he even did that. But used his position, used his skills, and got an arm triangle choke. And actually, Robertson didn't tap; he actually went out cold. So, I mean, another great performance by Fajeda, a guy, I'm going to be honest, I think was kind of an underdog in this fight, despite fighting in his home country. I thought he was kind of an underdog because there was a lot of hype on Carl Roberson, and part of it probably coming from me, a guy who had seen him compete in Glory. But that's how you beat a high-level kickboxer. You take that dynamic striking out of the equation, and you hope you can keep it long enough that Robeson can't unleash something on you, and that's exactly what Fajeda was able to do. All right, we got a comment here from Peter saying if I could break down the MVP fight for me. Let me see. Well,
and then someone said it's cheating.
It's cheating if I break it down for him. Oh, so Peter can use it on our MMA preview show. Is that what he wants?
Frank.
Let's see. I can give you a Cliff Notes version, Peter. How about that? Is that okay? Let me look it up. I actually forget who even MVP's fighting. It's not David Rickles, is it? Who's even he fighting? I feel like I should know who he's fighting.
Bellator 200.
Let's see. You're probably gonna laugh that. Oh, you don't know who he's fighting? Like I don't remember half the stuff. He's had so many he is fighting David Rickles. Okay, that's who I thought he was fighting. That was completely off the top of my head. I had. All right, brief preview because that's coming up in next weekend. But just real brief preview. Obviously, distance is going to be the key. The more it's at range, the more he can use that karate style stance. MVP is definitely going to be able to win this fight. But David Rickles is a guy that he likes to come forward, he likes to be aggressive, and he likes to get in close with his punching combinations. And obviously, David Rickles has fought a lot of his career in Bellator at 155, so he's going to be a smaller guy in there. So MVP already has a pretty big length. He was already going to cover a pretty good amount of distance, but it's going to be interesting how he plans on getting on the inside to attack MVP, because if he can, I think actually he can have some success. If he doesn't, he's probably going to get knocked out. That's my brief preview. Yeah, get your pen. All right, let's get to that main card though of 224 though, Kayla. As you said, Vitor Belfort against Machida. What is supposedly the last fight for Vitor Belfort. I think there's a chance he might go to Rizin so he can use TRT, but we'll see. But actually, the first round of this fight, rather pedestrian. Kind of, I had a feeling both guys would be taking their times in this fight. Obviously, that's what Machida is known for, and Vitor Belfort, I think really since coming back to the UFC has been a lot more patient and willing to counter. And that's really what we saw in the first round. Both guys really kind of waiting for the other to blink, waiting for the other guy to move. So the first round, not much happened. Second round, Machida found out enough information to land that switch kick push right to the face. And this wasn't, while yes, it's almost like the Anderson Silva one. The reason it's different is because I feel like Vitor kind of had more of an inkling where it was going. You know, the defense, the gap that Machida had to shoot with that kick, I think was different than the one Silva did. So I think this one was a lot more methodical, was a lot more like surgical. And that was from all that information in the first round. He saw that he had a chance to land that kick. And I mean, like a sniper, you know, from 1,000 yards away, he landed that. And that was all she wrote. He bowed to Vitor, and you know, he got his paycheck. He got a performance of the night bonus and got out of there with an extra 50 G's.
You know, no one, of course, wants to get knocked out, but I feel like if you're going to get knocked out, I'd rather take like, a fancy kick from Lyoto Machida.
Yeah.
I think at least you can say like, all right, out of all of my knockout highlight reels, at least I have that one on there. So
Yeah, I mean, that's Vitor's career, though. He's a guy that he'll either do that to you or it's happened to him, and that's kind of been his trademark. And yeah, it's obviously you want to go out with the win, but I mean that's what happened to even a guy in Machida's. I mean, both are towards the end of their careers. Obviously, with Vitor saying it would be his last, but honestly, I could see Machida end up now a couple weeks later saying this could be his last. You know, he might now. I wouldn't be surprised if he retires after that because I don't know how. I mean, if you think about Kayla, he's not competing for a championship anymore at middleweight or light heavyweight. He's not really competing with the elite anymore. He's been knocked out and finished several times in his last few fights. Even though he got by Eric Anders, let's be honest, that was not a great performance by him, and he'll admit that. And doing something like this in your home country against another legend, I don't know how it gets much better than this. So if I were Machida, I'd sit down, with his family there and really talk through whether or not he has to compete or should compete. Because I think that's the perfect way to go out if I'm the Dragon.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, we got John Lineker against Brian Keller. Boy, John Lineker, man, I tell you what, I was very impressed with his performance against Marlon Vera in his last fight. And this fight, probably taking on a guy, not as highly regarded. Obviously, he's still coming off the win over Henan Brown. You got to still, give him dap for that because no one had heard of Brian Kelleher before the Henan Brown fight. But Lineker at 135, the fact that he can just throw hard almost as much as he wants, that he can just come forward, be crazy, be right in people's faces. It's really hard for these guys to contend with. And Keller just couldn't do it. He just couldn't keep up with that pace. He probably couldn't see where some of these shots were coming. He tried a couple times to take it down. It didn't work out. I think maybe in the first or second round, he had a little bit of a time on top, but for the most part, Lineker shut him down. And if you can't take Lineker down, good luck, because I don't know if you really want to stand with this guy, Kayla.
Yeah, Hands of Stone. Again, I didn't catch this one. I was just catching up and reading on it. I did see an interview where Lineker was surprised that he was able to get the finish, though. Why do you think he was saying that after watching the fight?
I think why he would have said that because by the time this fight got into the third round, Keller had already taken a lot of shots, and he probably thought, like, man, this is just a tough guy. I'm still going to go out there and go it. He goes, but at that point, he probably wasn't looking for a finish. He just wanted to make sure he didn't get finished. And so I think that's kind of what it was. But, he eventually landed a couple that finally kind of cracked the shell of Keller, and he was able to get that finish. And that's the only thing I could think of. I don't know how well John Lineker knows Henan Barao, and maybe because he saw the way he beat up Barao, maybe he expected that this is a tough guy. So maybe in his head mentally, he already knew, like, this is going to be a tough guy to finish. But if I stay on him, I'm going to at least win the fight. And so maybe that's his thought process.
What do you think about Brian and Sugar Sean O'Malley's beef, Twitter beef?
I love Sugar Sean. Don't get me wrong. But Sean O'Malley, I don't think would have done any better in that fight than Brian Kelleher did. I'm going to be honest. I think John Lineker would whoop Sugar Shane. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know if Sugar Shane could do to Henan Barao what Brian Keller did. I think that's fair. So while I love Sugar Sean, and he's had, obviously his last fight was a great performance, and he's undefeated and all that, and again, I like the kid, but Sugar Shane has not taken on the talent that Brian Kelleher. I mean, his last two fights, he's taken on John Lineker and former world champion Henan Barao. Those two guys alone are better than anyone Sean O'Malley has faced in his whole entire career. I mean, he's faced Andre Ward and and Sukumkamp. I mean, those are okay guys, but they're not at Barao or Lineker level.
Right.
So, I kind of get it, but I don't know. Hey, that's what people do. He's upset that he lost, so he's taken out on someone he perceived he could beat, and and Sean O'Malley saying, "Well, I haven't lost yet." So I mean, I get both guys are very confident in their abilities, and if anything, it leads to a very intriguing matchup somewhere down the road.
For sure.
All right, as you mentioned, Mackenzie Dern against Amanda Cooper. The reason I kind of want to gloss over this one is because this is now, they showed this stat before this fight. The fighter who misses weight before this fight with Mackenzie Dern had won 9 out of the last 10 matchups. Now make it 10 out of the last 11 matchups. And this might be, in terms of percentage, I think they threw up like the percentage. She basically weighed in almost at the flyweight division, a whole division ahead of where this was supposed to be at strawweight. And they said that'd be like if for a middleweight fight at 185, the dude weighed in at like 198. You know, they kind of in comparison in terms of the percentage of, you know, weight to what the matchup was supposed to be. So this was a fight where, yes, Mackenzie Dern won. I'm not that surprised she won. Weight aside, I think had even she waited, I still would have picked her against Amanda Cooper. As much as I like Amanda Cooper because she's from right here, you know, just trains, you know, a few miles up the road from me here in Michigan. So I'm always going to root for her. I'm always going to be, you know, a fan of hers just because of that. You know, she's one of the few UFC fighters still living and training here in Michigan. But taking on a very high-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and Cooper's weakness so far in the UFC has been great jiu-jitsu players. I mean, she got submitted to Tatiana Suarez in her UFC debut in the Ultimate Fighter finale. And of course, Cynthia Carvalho at that time was a complete unknown, submitted her in the first round by rear naked choke. And of course, what happens in this fight, Kayla? She gets rear naked choke. Now, it wasn't set up the way we thought it was going to be. It was set up by a huge overhand right. Whereas perceived in this fight, obviously Cooper was thought to have the advantage. But that's what happens, you know, when you add in the extra weight, 4-ounce gloves, you only need one punch to change the outcome of the fight. And you don't need to be a great striker to land an overhand right. And Cooper was unfortunately got hit with one of those. And once it went to the ground, you add in being rocked, there wasn't really much he was going to be able to do once Dern got on top of her.
Yeah, you know, and I think for that reason, knowing that she was going to obviously be the heavier fighter, it was the last fight that I had seen Amanda, and there was a tenacity that I don't think we saw in this fight. She definitely was being a little more cautious, which is understanding since she was going against, you know, someone so skilled on the ground. But I think that's kind of where she messed up too, is knowing that Mackenzie was going to come in with all of that extra power behind her. And yeah, it's disappointing because I think you had tweeted it. It just takes away from a great performance of Mackenzie Dern when she's going in and playing so unfairly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said, and I stand behind that because she's now had 7 professional mixed martial arts fights, and she's missed weight for 4 of them. There's obviously an issue. So for the UFC, she can't continue to fight at 115 pounds. There's nothing so far that shows to me she's dedicated to making the weight at that weight class. So with that said, if she's going to continue to fight in the UFC, which again, I have no problem with, but it can't be at 115 pounds because I think that's a disservice to the whole division. I'm glad Cooper got the extra 10%. Normally it's only 20% of the purse, but she actually got 30. So at least Cooper got 30%. And you got to give her a lot of credit because I think a lot of girls in her situation would have said no. But like I said, when you're making a flight all the way from Detroit, Michigan to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil to make a fight, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to say no. You know, you put all that time, effort, and energy. You had to fly, you know, that's like halfway across the world, you know, heading south. You're there already. It's kind of hard. I see why Cooper wanted to take the fight, even though now all of a sudden she's 4-4, and you look at her record and you go, wow, it's really not that great. But when you really dive in and you look at the situation, you realize this is a fight realistically probably never should have been booked. I'm going to be honest. I think this was a mismatch from the start. And then you obviously add in the weight thing even more so. And she's really, and for Mackenzie, I know motivation is what a lot of people are talking about, and I think that's a big part of it. But I think it's more, what does she really want to do with the rest of her life? Because she's been doing jiu-jitsu for over 20 years since she was a little kid. And I guess for a lot of people, they're saying this is kind of the next evolution from doing jiu-jitsu. But it just doesn't really seem like she wants to do mixed martial arts. You know what I mean? So if I were her, I would really sit down, like, what do you want to do for a career? Do you want to continue, like, just doing jiu-jitsu seminars and maybe doing the occasional tournament every once in a while, making money that way with endorsements? Or do you really want to be a fighter? Because right now, to me, Kayla, I see someone that I think is kind of half-assing it. You know, it's just kind of going through the motions. And that eventually she'll face someone that can stop a takedown, that's maybe, maybe just as good at jiu-jitsu, or, has enough to stop, defend it. And she's going to get seriously hurt because she's not taking it seriously. And this is not a sport that you can just half-ass. And so I think that's something she's really going to have to sit down and kind of look in the mirror and realize, do I want to be a mixed martial arts fighter? Because I'm not really sure the answer is yes right now.
Yeah, and why wasn't that conversation, why didn't it happen before you decided to sign a UFC contract? Her stock just as an athlete, her stock within the UFC of selling cards, it's plummeting down because she's not able to make weight and she's not taking this serious. And that's why I thought it was so weird that she took one Invicta fight and then jumped right into the UFC. I was concerned, had her team, had the UFC, had she's spoken with everyone and decided that this was the move that she wanted to make, because now she's on the big stage looking foolish.
Yeah, and it says something too when a gym like the MMA Lab, which I would consider a highly touted gym, with Ben Henderson and John Crouch and all the gentlemen there in Arizona, basically say, we don't want you to come into our facilities anymore. You know what I mean? Not because she was a bad person or a bad teammate, or, she would say outlandish stuff or make people feel uncomfortable. It's simply because she wasn't showing up. And they're like,
she's not representing their team well.
Exactly. So I think that tells you something when a gym like that is willing to tell someone as good at, a good martial artist like Mackenzie Dern to say, we no longer need your services. I think that's very telling, and that's another reason why ads is, what does she want to do? Because it just doesn't seem like fighting, or at least the unfun part of fightings, is something she wants to do. But that's the part you got to be good at, because like I said, you can get yourself seriously hurt if you're half-assing the sport.
Moving on.
Yes, co-main events. Very close fight here between Kelvin Gastelum and Jacare Souza. I thought the first round was very close between these two. I probably would have gave it to Jacare with his overall ground control there. And looking at the stats there for the first round, again, according to Fight Metric, Jacare didn't land a takedown, but he outstruck Gastelum 32-9. And talk about accuracy between these two, at least in the first round. Gastelum was 9 of 9 on his landed strikes, and Jacare was 32 of 33. You got to give him credit for the accuracy in that round. Round two, once again, Kelvin Gastelum stopped the takedown. Those first two rounds, Kayla, Jacare combined 0 for 5 on taking the fight to the ground, striking dead even at 24 apiece. Jacare a little more accurate, 56 thrown to 73 thrown for Kelvin Gastelum. But the harder strikes, and obviously the aggressive nature, the moving forward nature, was with the American and Kelvin Gastelum. So to me, Kelvin Gastelum had round two. He had Jacare very hurt in that round. I thought was very close to finishing it. Jacare somehow was able to get a second win, come back, head into the third round, another close round, 24-22 in terms of land strikes, slight favor for Kelvin Gastelum. Jacare did land a takedown. His only takedown in the fight landed. He got in that first round, or got in that third round. Even though he had ground control in the first, it wasn't from an official takedown. But I thought Gastelum was the more aggressive, even though Jacare landed a few power punches. I still think Gastelum, that aggressive nature, the moving forward, again, pretty much for the most part, shutting the takedowns down. I would have gave him round three narrowly. I wouldn't have been upset had Jacare won it or one way around. I knew it was going to be a close fight because I think that third round was the hardest one to score, so I could really see the judges going either way. And that's what happened. The judges went the way of Kelvin Gastelum. He gets out a split decision victory, and in the process gets his biggest win of his mixed martial arts career.
Do you think that we saw the same Jacare in there, or do you think he was having a night off? I know that was a collective statement that I had read, that people
I don't think he
just felt like
I don't think he had an off night, in my opinion. I don't think he did. I just think he was taking on a guy. Look at his last time he lost, Kayla. Who was that to?
Now you're making me pull
It was
up.
Robert Whittaker. All right? And Robert Whittaker.
Right. Either Robert and then Yoel.
Yeah.
Right? Those are his last two losses.
Right. But if you look at Robert Whittaker, he's a guy that used to fight at welterweight. He's a little smaller. He's the guy that hits very hard and is very fast. Who's very similar to that? Kelvin Gastelum. So I knew this was going to be a very close fight because Kelvin Gastelum has a lot of the same skills as the current champion, Robert Whittaker, who kind of scorched Jacare not that long ago. So I knew if Gastelum could do what Robert Whittaker did, he'd have a chance. The difference was in that second round, Whittaker put Jacare away. Gastelum didn't. So that third round, obviously Jacare's a big middleweight. I think Gastelum was starting to get tired a little bit too, just trying to deal with the size and strength of Jacare. I think it took a lot of skill to stop him 1-for-9. I think you got to say that's a win for Gastelum. If you told even if Gastelum would have lost this decision, if you would have told him, hey, you only got taken down once out of 9 attempts by Jacare, what do you think? And he would say, I probably did a pretty good job. It probably was a close fight. And it was. That was his main job because he knew if he could keep it standing, his speed might be too much for Jacare. And I really think that was probably the difference was that hand speed. I don't think Jacare, especially in that third round, saw where a lot of those shots were coming. Jacare did his best. I think because of the size difference, Gastelum was probably a little closer. That's why you saw some of those power punches, even lazy, slow at that point from Jacare, winded, landed because Gastelum has to be in closer because he's just the smaller guy. So that was the only probably really negative I saw from Gastelum was in that third round. Maybe not quite as much in and out movement because one of those shots could have ended his night. He definitely got hit with some bombs. So I would say for Gastelum, that was the only negative I really took away. But overall, I think a very solid performance. He got close to getting submitted in that first round with that armbar. So I think overall, this was a very nice performance by Kelvin Gastelum.
Worthy of the next title shot?
I wouldn't be mad if they gave him another fight because you got to be honest, I almost kind of don't count that win against Michael Bisping. I mean, come on, that was 2 weeks after getting submitted, to GSP as a fight Bisping I don't think should have took. So, yeah, he put him away in the first round. But and this was a split decision against Jacare. This one was very much up in the air. I'd like to see it. Now, unfortunately, I would really like to see him take on Luke Rockhold, but it appears as though Luke Rockhold is trying for 205 pounds. So with that said, the next guy in mind to me would be David Branch, who's coming off a huge victory over Thiago Santos. So I would say Kelvin Gastelum against David Branch would be a very possible matchup for me.
Okay.
But we'll see. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't be knocking at the UFC headquarters doors if Kelvin Gastelum is the one that gets the next middleweight title shot. It wouldn't be crazy. But yeah, that I think that'd be a good fight next though. All right, let's get to this main event here. This was a super dominant performance by Amanda Nunes. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, this was a mismatch. This fight shouldn't have been booked." I don't know about that. But the reason it was just booked at the wrong time. Because I don't think off an 18-month layoff, Kayla, you should be fighting the best fighter in the world at your weight class.
Right, for a title fight.
That's not what should be happening. So I think the UFC did a disservice to Raquel Pennington. But when you've been in this game and you've had so much, up and downs as Raquel Pennington's had, obviously coming off this injury, you get why you wouldn't say no to a title shot. You know what I mean? Because if they're like, hey, your next fight, you're going to be fighting for the title and you haven't fought for 18 months, it's really hard to say no to that. And I get that because she may not get another one in her career because there's a risk if they give her that kind of tune-up fight and she loses, how much longer does that set her back? I get that. But what the alternative was this, a complete whitewash where she got outstruck 152-79 and Amanda Nunes was all over her up until this finish as she threw 288 strikes. Absolutely ridiculous. That's 100 more than Raquel threw. Not to mention three of four successful on the takedowns. Raquel tried her hardest, but only 1 of 8 in that category. Couldn't really do much of anything, and her only takedown was early in the second round, which did result, in a lot of damage for the Colorado native. And what ended up we seeing is a fight where we ended up seeing a one-sided fight because of it.
Yeah, and obviously a controversial fourth round or going into the fifth, her asking to be done now she's coming out saying she's glad her team agreed to keep her in. But I think I was against the Amanda Nunes Chris Cyborg fight when they first were announcing the rumors, just because I felt like both ladies had title defenses that they should fight first. But after seeing how Amanda's evolving and doing so well as a champion, she's pretty much cleaned out her division. Besides a couple girls in there that are on the rise, now this fight is making more sense for them to put together for me.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have been opposed to it before this fight with Raquel Pennington, because I do think, again, I would have liked to see Pennington take one more fight to prove that she's, all there after the injury, and kind of reaffirm herself as the number one contender, because very rarely in a division, Kayla, can you go 18 months without fighting and still be considered the number one contender. So I think just from that standpoint alone, I would have liked to see Raquel get one more. So I do feel like they kind of rushed that matchup. But I think one of the reasons they did is because they wanted to make sure and try to help build up Nunes versus Cyborg, because it had been a while since we had seen Nunes. It had been since last September. So it was kind of a way to try to say, yeah, if she can go out and beat this very tough Raquel Pennington, it can kind of help set up and sell. But I think it kind of had the opposite effect. I think, while, yes, it showed she's dominant. Yes, she's the number one girl. She's definitely the champion and all that. I think it showed that she can't really carry a fight on her own anymore, despite her despite having two title fights on cards that did over 1 million buys. Obviously, her fight against Ronda, and obviously she was the main event at UFC 200 against Miesha Tate. So a lot of people bring that up, but obviously those cards were not because of her. They were because of all the other stuff that was going on. So given the chance to kind of headline by herself, obviously with there was the fight in September against Shevchenko. That one didn't do amazing, but did way better than this. This one, by all reports, is set to do less than 6 figures. So I think she almost needs to fight Cyborg, just because what else can they do with her as far as a headline? You can't put her as the headline of a main event anymore. She either has to be like a Fox card or a co-main event, because it's now proven that she can't do the numbers, and it also, I think, is proven that the UFC is either unwilling or just doesn't want to put that money into promoting her, because it just doesn't. A card should do more than 6 figures.
Yeah, it's weird that there's some unlikable champions currently on the roster.
Yeah. And
don't really get it.
Yeah, a lot of people are bringing up, oh, it's because she doesn't speak English well. Oh, it's, she doesn't have that great of a personality, this and that. I mean, I don't know. You can bring up a lot of different reasons why, but at the end of the day, she's just not selling. I mean, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. But I think the Cyber fight needs to take place, just because I'm not sure what else you would give Amanda Nunes. Like I said, if someone can go 18 months without fighting like Raquel Pennington and still be the best option to fight for the championship, then right now your division is lack of contenders, and you really need to rebuild of them. And that's part of the reason is because Amanda Nunes has beat some of them, and part of the reason is some of the girls have now gone on to fight at 125 or try to fight at this new 145 weight class. There's a lot more options now for these women. And I think that's part of the reason why. Obviously, at one time, bantamweight was super strong, but right now, I wouldn't say it's their weakest female division, but it's starting to look that way. It's starting to get weaker.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like the idea that they're going to have a tough show focused on 145ers. I would think that maybe, one or two of those girls, who knows if 145 is their natural weight, or maybe they can jump around those two divisions. We'll see. It looks like maybe 2019 they'll put a little more focus on the heavier weight divisions for the ladies.
Yeah, I mean, when this fight coming up here in Chicago between Holly Holm and Megan Anderson is the first non-title fight at 145 pounds for the female division, and it's been over a year since that division was established. I'm using that in quotations with Durain Durandamy and Holly Holm. That says something. That's a big deal. What other division has had that happen?
Yeah.
So, yeah, for Amanda Nunes, most likely Cyborg is next, and obviously the winner of Holly Holm and Megan Anderson will probably fight the winner. And hi, Ray. Thanks for checking in.
Hey, Ray.
All right, we're going to go to, real quickly, Glory 53 was this past weekend on ESPN as well as UFC Fight Pass. I thought a very good night of fights. The first couple, we saw the featherweight tournament won by Sergey Adamchuk, who's the former champion. Now, he's already fought current champion Robin van Roosmalen once, but I think I'm very interested in a rematch and not really too surprised that he won this tournament. So he gets by there. Then we see an incredible 17-second knockout by Cedric Doumbé against Tong Chai. Man, I don't know if I've ever seen Doumbé get someone out there that quickly with the left hook. That was pretty impressive. Yusari Belgari absolutely dominating Kaspersky. No. I mean, they said Kaspersky had 2 weeks notice, but I mean, Belgari is such a huge dude. I want to say he's like 6'7" or something in the middleweight division. Dude's crazy tall. I mean, on 2 weeks' notice, I don't know who you're bringing in to act like Belgari. Like he's one of those guys that has to be very hard to game plan for because there's not too many dudes walking around that are 6'7" that's going to move like that. It's going to have that speed. So definitely a very hard guy to play for. And then, what do they call him? Well, it's Kiamukau, but they call him another name. Anyways, he won second round knockout with a jumping head kick. Absolutely incredible. Kendall Grove. No, Kendall Grove doesn't have the kickboxing skills of Belgari, though. Not even Kendall Grove 10 years ago. But yeah, in 2 weeks' notice, I don't think they're flying Kendall Grove from Hawaii to Poland to train with this dude. But that's a good thought, though, Ray. Zenedine Hammerlane, very impressive knockout win over Michael Dute, who's a very tough dude. Then we saw Angela Mexican. Oh, I said it wrong. Angela Mexen. I was pronouncing she got by Emile Debbie. Not too surprising. I thought Mexen would win. And then Jafar Wilness. This is a guy, actually, Kayla, who got cut by Glory. They weren't impressed with them. Jafar Wilness, he got cut. He fought for a couple different organizations, built back up, got on a 4-fight winning streak, signed him back to Glory. He's taking on Jamal Ben Sadiq, who had a very close performance in his last fight to beating current champion Rico Verhoeven. That was a very competitive fight, so a lot of people thought, all right, he beats Jafar Wilness. He's right back in there in the title picture to get another shot at Rico. But Jafar Wilness, I'm not like super surprised he won. I don't think it's as big upset as people were claiming, but Jafar Wilness put it right to Jamal Ben Sadiq. And I think Jafar Wilness, a guy that, again, was out of Glory not that long ago, beats Ben Sadiq, and now all of a sudden I think he puts together a very intriguing matchup because I think Glory's obviously trying to scratch their head of finding people to be competitive with Rico Verhoeven. I mean, they scheduled his fight coming up here in June was supposed to be a non-title fight against Milan Brestovic, a guy he had already beat soundly for the title maybe 2-3 years ago. And so originally it was supposed to be a non-title fight, and then Glory's like, what the hell, we'll just make it a title fight, even though Brestovic probably doesn't deserve a title fight. So that's probably another fight we're going to see Rico Verhoeven smash. But if we can get somebody, Jafar Wilness, who kind of seems to be hungry for it, and I don't think he's fought Jafar Wilness, at least not in Glory. I think Jafar Wilness puts him in a very good possibility because really the only other fight we know Rico will be taking anytime soon will be a rematch with Badr Hari. So let's get, and then main event, Bestati, the young kid. He's only 20 years old, Kayla. I think that's what impresses me so much about Bestati. He takes on a guy and sits on Piang, who was going for his 125th professional victory. That's ridiculous. The dude's been fighting as a professional fighter since he was 11 years old.
A professional at 11?
Yes, that's what they do in Thailand. It's insane. He wins, don't get me wrong. I definitely had him winning. But for Bestati to go toe-to-toe with a guy like Sidichai, who in my opinion, other than his fights with Robin van Roosmalen, where he's 1-1 with, which I hope we get a trilogy next, nobody's come close to touching the Thai fighter. Like, nobody. And here comes this 20-year-old kid, first chance at like a major world championship. And I think he actually might have won 2 rounds against Sidichai. I thought he performed very well. He dealt with that left leg. I thought well. He moved well. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by this time next year, or even the next 2 years, we see Bestati as the glory lightweight champion. He very much impressed me. He just gets he was close. I think if he just keeps with it, we could see a guy who can definitely be, you know, he could be up there with the Rico Verhovens of the world, where they got to like, wow, who are we gonna get to fight this guy? Because at 20 years old, he's already coming close to beating Sidchai. I think that's a big deal. So if you get a chance, I believe it's still on the ESPN app, or if you can find it online on YouTube, or I think is it the Pluto app for Glory Fight?
Pluto.
Or check out the Pluto app. I highly recommend. Really, the whole main card was great, but if you want to see great technical kickboxing, none better than Sidchai. Feel on Glory 53. Thanks for bearing with me, Kayla.
Oh yeah, no worries. It's cutting out a little bit.
All right.
Check out soon though, because I have to get to work. Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. Last thing, Kayla, before we let you go here, we got Bellator 199 from this past weekend. What were some of your thoughts here on these? I believe it was six. Was it five? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, five main card fights we had for Bellator 199.
Well, I don't know why I'm thinking that with this heavyweight Grand Prix, we were going to get like amazing, 5-round fights with these guys. They are heavyweights for a reason, and that's why, these bouts are so exciting. But I wasn't expecting a 15-second knockout in the main event. What did you think of that?
I was a little surprised too, to be honest. I thought the fact that both guys were wrestlers, I actually thought we may see a lot of meeting in the clinch, and honestly, King Mo's not a guy. He's been finished before, but he's never been a guy I would consider like really chinny. Never a guy really sounding and get blasted in the first round or anything. So, not to say Ryan Bader doesn't have power, because he clearly does. He's knocked out quite a few people, even go back to his UFC tenure early in fights. So that's not the part that impressed me. It's the fact that he was able to so accurately counter that rush in by King Mo. And I think that's something that just a few years ago, Kayla, I don't think Ryan Bader would have been able to do. I think it really shows that his stand-up has just continually been getting better. And the fact that he's been doing like continuous stand-up training for, when did he start with the UFC? Because I want to say that's kind of when he probably really started taking like stand-up seriously. Let's see. He started with the UFC in 2008 was the Ultimate Fighter finale. So, I mean, 10 years of like continuing to do stand-up. Before that he had, a lot of wins on the regional circuit, but, that's what I mean. I think it was a work in progress. I mean, you've been doing MMA, and his professional debut was, wow, this is crazy. His professional debut was in 2007, right? In March. He fought for the Ultimate Fighter finale in December of 2008. So, like, he only had 18 months in the sport when he had won the Ultimate Fighter. Like, that's what I mean. Like, he had he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. His first 9 months as a professional mixed martial artist, he had 6 fights in 1 year. And he started in March of that. Yeah. So that's what I mean. Like, and then he added his fights with Ultimate Fighter. So, I mean, when he started the UFC, he really like just started like training the sport. So now 10 years later, you're starting to see finally that evolution. I mean, they always say it takes 10,000 hours to be good at something. So I think we're finally starting to see Ryan Bader get at that precipice of being a great striker. And I think that was all proven last weekend as he knocked out King Mo in 15 seconds.
And what great timing when he's currently holding a belt himself and, an opponent in this Grand Prix tournament. I think that him and Matt Mitrione will probably be the most competitive fight, in the Grand Prix. Not that I don't love a Chael and Fedor mashup, but I think that one's definitely that fight that's.
I mean, there's now, with the 4 people left, there's now a 50% chance this fight is won by a non-heavyweight fighter. because Chow's really a middleweight fighter, and obviously Ryan Bader has fought pretty much his whole career at 205 pounds. You know, I looked up, you know, like I said, I was looking at his earliest records. A lot of those don't even show a weight class. So some of those may have been above 205. I don't know. But I'll put it this way. When he started with the UFC in 2008 on The Ultimate Fighter, he had not fought above 205 pounds. So even if he had, it's been 10 years since he's fought not at light heavyweight. So that's kind of crazy that the tournament could still be won by a non-heavyweight. I think that would be ridiculous. But at least Ryan Bader is more apt to do it than I guess Chael Sonnen. But, you know, we'll see. I don't know. I do think, like I said, the Matt Mitrione Bader one should be more compelling, should be more competitive than the Sonnen Fedor, just on paper.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Adam Piccolotti kicked things off. I thought he looked really good against Carlton Banks. You know, Banks had some success, but Piccolotti's very good with his jiu-jitsu, so I wasn't too surprised he was able to win by rear naked choke. Czech Congo showing kind of a throwback. When's the last time? You know, that's how Czech Congo used to look back in the day. You know, it's been a while since we've seen Czech Congo actually been able to knock someone out. And he knocked out a very tough fighter that, you know, Kayla, you've interviewed Mr. Ilila a couple times, and this was like, I think, supposed to be like an alternate style fight. But Congo, I mean, he can still do that. Power's the last thing to go on you, and if a guy like that can land a straight
first title,
you know, that's what happens.
Yeah, and I think that a performance like that puts him in line to maybe take on that first you know, title shot against whatever champ we get in the tournament.
Possibly. Of course, we still got like a guy like Justin Wren out there as well, who was not included for this tournament for whatever reason. John Fitch did what John Fitch does. I mean, I don't think any of us are surprised at what took place. I mean, towards the end of that first round, yeah, there was a brief moment where it looked like Daly may have gotten to finish. He was starting to kind of light up Fitch and probably won that first round, but Daly's just never, I mean, at this stage in his career, you know, John Fitch was kind of always that, but if even more so now at 40, he's definitely not going to change his style. And then the same thing with Daly. Daly's now in his mid-30s. He's a kickboxer, so it really was just a matter of time. And yeah, John Fitch is in Bellator, but I mean, did that victory to you, Kayla, look like somebody that's competing with Rory McDonald, with Douglas Lima, or Andre?
Well, yeah,
you know
I
what
mean, some people are quick to say like, oh, he should get the next title shot. I don't know about that. It's nice to see that he can still, you know, like you said, bring what John Fitch brings and still compete in there. But I think we need to see him. Paul Daly too is in a weird mindset where he's kind of checked out with Bellator,
right?
too.
And that's the thing. And for Bellator, it's perfect because Paul Daly is already saying, oh, you should be giving me this and giving me that. So, of course, who they give him? The worst matchup possible in John Fitch.
Yeah.
Everyone knows there's no way. Like, if they ran this fight 10 times, John Fitch should win 9. You know what I mean? Like, you leave that one fight for maybe, like I said, him catching an uppercut. But, I mean, time out of time, John Fitch should win this matchup. And so now that kind of squells any talk of Paul Daly fighting for a Bellator fight or getting the fight that he wants, because they could be like, well, you lost to John Fitch. We gave you a quality guy. You know what I mean? So for Bellator, it was kind of the perfect guy to match him up against to kind of maybe help shut him up and hope that he eventually goes away.
But he's saying he wants to go away, and Scott Coker's saying, no, we still want to keep him here. He's one of our favorite fighters. Who knows what's going to happen with that?
Honestly, they should just cut him, let him go. I mean, he hasn't really done much for the organization, if I'm being honest, since coming over. I mean, realistically, who's his best win against?
I mean, he's given us some exciting knockouts for sure.
Yeah, overall. But I mean, like, all right, so he signed with Bellator. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay, his first ever Bellator fight. Well, he went to Strikeforce first before going to Bellator, because his last fight in the UFC was UFC 113 in 2010. He then fought for Impact FC, Shark Fights, and then signed with Strikeforce, where he beat Scott Smith, which got him the title shot against Nick Diaz, which he lost. He also had a fight in Bama in between there. Then he fought Tyron Woodley, lost. He fought in Bama and Strikeforce again, kind of going 2-2 in there, and then fought with Bellator against Rudy Bears, who actually is a 155-pound fighter. If you look at his record, scorches him. Then there were like visa issues, so he fights for Dubai FC, Cage Contender, and Cage Warriors, and then an organization called Legends, and then Bama again a few times before finally returning then at Bellator 34. And these are some of the guys he beats: Dennis Olsen, who's heard of him, Andre Santos, who's heard of him, right? And Andy Ulrich, who's heard of him, okay? And then he had the kickboxing match against Fernando Gonzalez, which would have been an exciting MMA fight, but it wasn't. It was part of the dynamite thing. And then they give him someone legit, right? Loses to Douglas Lima. Then, okay, I'll give him credit. The Brendan Ward is probably the only good guy that he's fought. And then, of course, he gets scorched by Rory McDonald. And he knocks out Lorenz Larkin. I'll give him credit there. But, I mean, realistically, I would say really only the Lorenz Larkin one's the only one that really, I think, surprised people. But really, if you look at his Bellator career, he hasn't taken on that good a talent. And, you know, he's never been a real threat for the title. And obviously, he's fought for a whole bunch of organizations. He's pretty much had problems from the start with Bellator. So I think it's time to kind of depart ways and let Paul Daly be Paul Daly.
Yeah, and, you know, he's not – it's very clear he's not going to change his game, his mindset of being this company guy. So it will be interesting to see where he goes if he leaves Bellator.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I mentioned, he's had fights in Bama and Cage Warriors, which are very big in the UK. There's a chance he could go to Risen. Obviously, the Professional Fighters League is a thing now. You know? So, you know, take that for what that's worth.
I know his coach says that they're hopeful the UFC will take him back, but a lot of people are shutting that down.
I mean, I think they could let him back because enough time has passed, and you know, if you look and if you kind of look at what he did compared to what other athletes have done, it kind of is like, it doesn't seem that bad. You know, because you're in the heat of a moment. It was a big matchup because if Paul Daly would have won, he probably would have fought for the world championship. He got absolutely, you know, mollywopped, you know what I mean? And the whole time, Koscheck even said he was talking trash in his ear. You know, sometimes your emotions run hot and stuff like that happens. And let's be honest, the punch didn't even really land. I mean, you see Koscheck kind of laugh it off. It's still something he should have done. I still agree with the decision to cut him at the time. But, you know, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, I can't believe they're letting this guy back in. You know what I mean? It wouldn't.
Right.
There are a lot of other people. I mean, considering all the things John Jones has done, I would say throwing a weak ass punch to Josh Koscheck is a lot lower than anything John Jones has done, or even anything Conor McGregor has done.
Right. And that's why I think they're hopeful is, the UFC's been a little more open to having these bad boys in there.
However, getting dominated by John Fitch is not a good look for trying to get into the UFC.
True.
I will say, though, if Bellator cut him now, he probably would get signed by the UFC. He'd have to go win a couple, at least one fight.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, that about does it for Bellator, Glory, UFC 224. We're going to move into UFC Chile. But as Kayla said, she has to go. So I'm going to break down UFC Chile. But Kayla, thanks for joining me here, talk about these fights. And obviously, we'll see you next week to talk about what I'm about to talk about here, the first ever non-Brazilian South American card for the UFC. So
a big deal.
So.
All right, Jim. Well, I'll definitely tune into this later just to hear your predictions, and I'll see you guys next week.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye.
It was Kayla Baity. You can follow her on Twitter at fangirl_MMA, as well as on her Instagram, same thing, at fangirl_MMA. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. And what about Jason High? In what regards, Ray? I guess I'm not as familiar to what Jason High did or didn't do. I remember them bringing it up on the Joe Rogan podcast, but it's not clear in my head. But I kind of remember there being somewhat of a situation. But yeah, that's something that probably could be forgiven. But I have to relook into it. It's been a while since I remember the Jason High situation. But right, being cut. But I mean, like, why was he cut? That's what I'm getting to. Was there a particular reason other than him losing? That's what I mean. I'm not 100% sure about the circumstance. So many guys get cut. It's not registering in my brain right now. If that makes any sense, Ray. He got cut after the RDA fight, but did he do anything specifically other than lose the RDA fight? Oh, pushing the... Okay, that's right. Okay, see, now it's coming back to me. That's what I was getting to. Yeah, again, that's something that, you know, you're not in your right mind when you lose. It's the heat of the moment. You're just trying to do something, and yeah, that's something that I don't think is as bad. I don't even think it's as bad as what Paul Daly did. So, yeah, I would say, Jason, again, I can see why he was cut. I get it, but that's something where if Jason High, you know, apologizes, you know, you give him a fine, he goes back and wins a couple more fights, I don't see any reason not to let him back in if I was running things. However, I'm not running things, and I'm not a bitter megalomaniac like Dana White. So chances are probably not, though, right? That he'll get back in as long as that man's in charge. All right, let's get to this UFC Chile card. I'm super excited. I think actually a very good Night of Fights book for Fox Sports 1. Coming to you live at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 in the West. Starting with a couple fights on Fight Pass, I would say the one highlighting the Fight Pass, Enrico Barzola against Brandon Davis in the featherweight division, I think is going to be absolutely amazing. Brandon Davis had an incredible fight in his last outing for the UFC, winning by knockout, and I wish, you know, maybe someday, Ray. I feel like, you know, I probably would need someone to help me out, like, you know, two-man it, but there are a lot of things I think I think I could do that might be different and might be warranted. I don't know. But who's me? You know, right? I'm just some guy talking on Facebook. I probably sound a lot better than some other people. I don't know. But yeah, Enrique Barzola against Brandon Davis I think is going to be absolutely incredible. Of course, Barzola is from neighboring Peru, so not that far from Chile, so expect him to have the advantage there in terms of crowd presence against the American Brandon Davis. But I think these two guys are very tremendous. Barzola is a guy who's won his last couple fights, much like his counterpart in Davis. 15-3 with one draw overall is the Peruvian fighter. And, you know, he joined the UFC winning the Ultimate Fighter Latin America, defeating Horacio Gutierrez. He then lost a very close split decision. We all know how tough this guy is in Kyle Bochniak. Just see his last fight against Zabig Mamed Shapirov. So we all know how tough Kyle Bochniak is. So no shame in that loss there. He's then ran off 3 straight victories, all by decision, all unanimous decision, being the likes of Chris Avila, Gabriel Benitez, and Matt Bessette. Those last two, I think, coming against some very good opponents. Gabriel Benitez and Matt Bessette is also a very high-quality UFC featherweight as well. Not a lot of people might know about him, but very good quality fighter. So he's definitely been able to beat high-quality guys, and Brandon Davis is another guy, I think, right in that same mold. Definitely a guy who, again, also has the loss to Kyle Bochniak. Again, that shows how tough Kyle Bochniak does. He also has a win over Austin Arnett. But that last fight against Steven Peterson, which ended up being fight of the night for UFC Austin early this year, just absolutely fantastic. Both guys really, I thought, did a great job. Very exciting fight. I kind of knew it was going to be a barn burner. And so, really, I think the difference in this fight, or one thing I would look at, is going to be the height and reach advantage that Brandon Davis brings to the table. He's going to be 3 inches taller than the Peruvian, and he's also going to have a 2-inch reach advantage. And also, they mentioned leg reach on the UFC website. He has a 3-inch leg reach advantage. So I think Barzola, who I would consider a pretty well-rounded fighter, he's going to have a tough time getting inside, not only to combat Brandon Davis, who I would say is probably a little better of a striker. Ground-wise, I would say Barzola is probably the better ground fighter. But as we saw against Brandon Davis, Steven Peterson's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and he was able to stop him from taking him down. So if this fight, the longer it stays standing, I mean, Brandon Davis, I think, showed in that last fight, this is a very tough dude, knows how to pace himself, knows how to throw punches, I think, half power, you know, really mix in the high power strikes, really knows how to kind of do that sort of strategy. So I would say if Barzola, if he can't get in the inside, I think Brandon Davis will walk away with another victory. But this is definitely one to watch. These are two high-level featherweight prospects, and I would definitely tune in to see their fight on the Fight Pass prelims. Looking at the FS2 prelims, got to be excited for Zach Cummings, a guy that's always entertaining. He's taking on Michel Prazeres, a guy who, much like the aforementioned Mackenzie Dern earlier in the program, has had a lot of trouble making weight, so the UFC forcing him up to 170. We'll see how he deals. Zach Cummins, a very good size 170. He's going to be 6 inches taller than the Brazilian. He's going to have a 8-inch reach advantage. So, Prazeres is obviously a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but with the weight up, how's he going to deal with Zach Cummins, who I do think does have some solid wrestling and obviously good power. So we'll see. I think that's a very intriguing matchup. And then, of course, the featherweight matchup between Brandon Moreno against Alexander Pantoja. These two fought on the Ultimate Fighter, battling for Demetrius for a shot at Mighty Mouse Johnson. Even though Moreno lost, it was a very close fight against Pantoja, who I believe was ranked the #1 guy entering the house on that season. So this time they're kind of doing it for real, so to speak, because Brandon Moreno so far since post-tough has looked really good. Winning 3 of his 4 fights, 2 performance of the night bonuses, 2 finishes beating the likes of Luis Smolka as well as Dustin Ortiz. He also has a split decision win over Ryan Benoit. And his last fight, he fell short against Sergio Pettis, but no shame in there. Sergio's a very good fighter. And I think Moreno probably learned a lot. Obviously, a lot of pressure was put on him with this fight being in his home country of Mexico. I don't know if he was quite ready for a 25-minute fight. I think that had a lot to do with it. So, again, a young guy who's, I think, he's only 24 years old. He's only had 18 fights. And really only the last couple of years has really been training full time and really, been able to kind of get this sport. So, I think this is going to be a very good fight. I think Pantoja, despite being the #1 guy in the house, a few years ago on that Ultimate Fighter show, I don't think has quite seen the success. I mean, he barely beat Eric Shelton not that long ago. He had the win over Neil Seri, but Neil Seri, not the quite same. And he has a loss to Dustin Ortiz, which is a guy that actually Moreno beat. So I would say the second time around, I probably would favor Moreno more. I think he's had more success, and I think he really learned a lot from his last fight being a main event. But either way, that's going to be a fantastic fight, because it was a fantastic fight the first time they fought in the Ultimate Fighter, and that was only 2 rounds. So we actually get to see another 5 minutes, so I think it should be a lot of fun. And Ray, yes, KGB, and Tatiana Suarez. I was going to say those two are not fighting each other, but yes, they are both featured on the card. I'll be getting to their matchups in just a moment as I get to the main card. Starting the welterweight division, which former Ultimate Fighter winner Chad Laprise will take on Vicente Luque. I think this is a really good fight. I'm a huge fan of Vicente Luque since coming into the UFC after his run on the Ultimate Fighter. So far in his UFC tenure, he has won, he lost his first fight on the Ultimate Fighter finale against Michael Graves. He then rattled off 4 in a row with 4 straight finishes, beating some tough guys, Hader Hassan, Hector Urbina, and Bilal Muhammad, 2 of those getting him a performance of the night bonus. He then ran into Leon Edwards, who is a very good striker. And I think Luque not only did he look off, I think Edwards he had the perfect game plan as well. I think he really frustrated Vicente Luque, and Luque never really let Luque get off on a streak and really get much success. So I think that was a very big win. But Luque comes back, he beats Nico Price, submits him, and now every single victory in the UFC is by finish. His record now stands at 12-6. So I think he's a really good fighter. Taking on Chad Laprise, who started out his UFC career with 3 consecutive victories, obviously one of those being the Ultimate Fighter winner. He then had a tough time as he got knocked out by Francisco Trinaldo, who at that time was during his 8-fight win streak or whatever. Then he loses a close fight to Ross Pearson, a fight that probably he should have won. That was a split decision. He then comes back and beats Thibaut Gotti, who's, again, nothing special, but he's able to get by him. And then gets by Brian Camozzi, which gives him a performance of the night bonus. And then he's able to take out Galfor Bufondo, who came into that fight with a lot of hype after his push-shove knockout in his last fight. That kind of surprised me. I actually picked against Chad Laprise in that fight because I thought Bufundo was the real deal, but Laprise proved me wrong as he has now won 3 straight in a row, all 3 knockout victories. So with that, I think this is going to be a very close fight. Or a competitive fight is what I should say, because I actually think we're going to get a finish one way or the other. As far as knockout power goes, I'd probably give a slight edge to Chad Laprise. I think he's maybe a little more technically sound, but I think overall grappling lies with the Brazilian Vicente Luque. So I think in those grappling exchanges, we could see the Brazilian come out on top. But I really think overall these two guys are just going to stand and throw at each other. Maybe in a scramble we see Luque try for a takedown, but that's not really his MO. So I think that's a possibility. I actually be very surprised to see Laprise shoot in on Luque. I think unless they see something in his fights that I don't, but unless they feel like they can replicate what Michael Graves did in his very first UFC fight, I would avoid that strategy. He's done very well at keeping things standing, that being Luque. So I'm not sure if that would be the best strategy, and I wouldn't say Chad Laprise is an amazing wrestler. So that would be strange to me. That could possibly happen. But I don't see that happening. I feel like Chad's probably going to be pretty confident of his technical skills, and I think this is going to be very technical, high level, and I think we're going to end up seeing a finish somewhere or other. I'm very excited for this fight. I think this is a very under the radar fight, and I think could possibly be fight of the night. All right, next fight of the evening. We finally get to see the UFC debut. A lot of people have been talking about her for years on the Invicta and Legacy or LFA circuit, and that's Andrea KGB Lee as she brings her 8-2 record into the UFC flyweight division, taking on Veronica Macedo, who is coming out of Venezuela, obviously a South American country. Her debut was against Ashley Evans Smith, which was actually up a weight class. She got knocked out in the 3rd round, but I thought Macedo actually, if I remember correctly, I think that was in, let's see, September 3rd, 2016. Was that in Germany? Yeah. I thought Macedo, for making her UFC debut against, I would consider a pretty quality opponent in Ashley Evans Smith, I thought performed admirably. And so that was her only fight so far in the UFC, and that was, almost 2 years ago. So how has she been doing since the layoff? That was also her first career loss. She's now 5-1-1. She's also at a new weight class. She'll be fighting close to home, which is nice, but it's almost kind of like she's re-entering, the UFC. And obviously, even at flyweight, she's still going to have a 3-inch height deficiency to Andrea KGB Lee, who again is 8-2 in her career. She is the former Legacy Fighting flyweight champion. She has been also fighting in Invicta as well. She is a girl that has really good kickboxing skills. Also, I believe just got her brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So also a very high-level grappler. A lot of people like to call her like the female Donald Cerrone. I would say very similar type game. A type of fighter who's not going to really go chasing the takedown, but if you take her down, you definitely are messing with a really good grappler. I think at times, she's got, I wouldn't say lazy, but I think she's gotten caught in the grappling, maybe overestimate or underestimating her opponent's grappling ability. And I think at sometimes she's left some holes in her stand-up. But I think overall, I think she's gotten better every single fight, win or lose. And for Macedo, definitely is in for a high-quality opponent. I'm just glad to see, and I'm just glad to see Andrea Lee, in the UFC. And, good luck to Macedo. I mean, maybe that's giving away my pick a little bit here, but Macedo with this layoff, new weight class, I think there's a lot of questions to be answered about Veronica Macedo, because we really don't know how good she is, considering she had one fight almost 2 years ago up a weight class against a fight where she was definitely, not favored to win. So we'll really see what it is, and we'll see Andrea Lee, we'll see if she can be what everyone thought she was going to be. I mean, this has been years going, like, if there was a flyweight division, she's a girl that has been talked about, a potential star in the making, and we'll see if she can do that. So I think despite it being her debut, I think there's a lot of pressure on Andrea Lee, and we'll see if she can rise to the occasion here in her UFC debut. Diego Rivas against Guido Cananetti. We got a South American battle here. Of course, Diego Rivas coming to us from Chile, so obviously he's going to have a huge pop in the crowd when he steps into the octagon there in Chile. He so far is 2-1 in the UFC, has a win over Noad Lahat, which is a very good performance. In fact, a one performance of the night in a second round knockout. However, it was back in 2016. He also actually made his UFC debut in 2014, and despite being in the UFC for now almost it'll be 4 years in November, has only fought 3 times. So Rivas really hasn't been able to get a lot of momentum, and his last fight was almost a year ago, August 5th of last year, and that was a loss to Jose Canoes. So I'm really interested, obviously, with fighting in his home country, that's got to give a nice boost to him, but I'm not really sure what to see. I mean, only fighting that many times and you only have 8 professional fights. Luckily for him, he's only 26 years old, so he still has a lot of time left in his career. He's taking on a guy in Guido Canetti who's 7-3 so far in his career. 3 times had fought in the UFC so far, just has the 1 win over Hugo Viana. That was all the way back in 2015. Very similar to his opponent, has been in the UFC since November of 2014, but has only fought 3 times. And his last fight, however, was in January of this year. However, he got submitted in the very first one by Kyung Ho Kang earlier this year. I believe that was at the UFC St. Louis card. So both guys coming off of losses. Both guys have struggled to stay healthy. However, Canetti, 38 years old. Like I said, just 26 for Rivas. So, I would probably say Rivas should be the favorite. But again, neither guy has really fought enough to really to be honest, to really give you a huge picture of what each guy brings to the table. I think this fight's going to kind of be unknown a little bit. But the big thing is, will there be an adrenaline dump for Rivas? Like I said, hasn't fought for a while. He's now fighting in his home country. That first round, you got to believe he's going to come out guns a-blazing. But will that lead to an adrenaline dump if he doesn't finish Canetti? And then will the veteran and Canetti be able to take over and use that to his advantage? I don't know. We'll find out. I think that one's the one fight in the card. I'm just not quite sure how that one's going to really go. But with him fighting in his home country, Chile, for Rivas, I think that should be interesting. Man, this fight. Oh, shoot. This is a fight. This is a hardcore MMA fans fight. So if you like great fights, again, I talked about the up-and-comer guys with Barzola and Brandon Davis. This is on that same level. These are 2 guys people should know about but probably don't, and Jared Cannonier and Dominic Reyes. These 2 guys are absolutely devastating in their power. Dominic Reyes is 8-0 so far in his career. I believe he has a knockout in like every single fight. This dude is absolutely incredible. He came onto the scene knocking out Joaquin Christensen in like 45 seconds. He then followed up with a dominant performance right here in my hometown of Detroit against Jeremy Kimball in his last fight, winning by submission. And this guy, yeah, he's skinny, but he hits hard. And this is a guy who is obviously going to have a huge height and reach advantage over Jared Cannonier, better known as the Devastator. He only has 1 decision fight in his career. That was only his 3rd fight, and that was over 3 years ago. Other than that, he's knocked out just about everybody that's been put in front of him. And Jared Cannonier, again, he's another very tough dude, another dude with absolute dynamite in his hands. However, these guys actually have the same reach at 77 inches, despite Dominic Reyes being 5 inches taller. So while the height's going to be different, they're actually going to have the same wingspan, which is absolutely crazy wingspan that to show you Cannonier's range. But, Cannonier's a guy who actually, believe it or not, started in the UFC at heavyweight, losing to Sean Jordan. But then he was able to defeat Cyril Asker. And then, boy, his fight against Kutalibe was amazing. If you haven't seen that one, go back, watch that one. He then took on Glover Teixeira in short notice. No surprising, Glover Teixeira still, even at this stage of his career, one of the best in the world. Even then, just a year ago, I don't think that was going to be a matchup that Glover was going to lose. Next fight, Nick Rourke, I believe, took that on short notice. Got absolutely destroyed. No surprise there. And then his last fight, very close fight against Jan Blachowicz, a fight that did go to decision. The difference, though, was the grappling. Blachowicz was able to tie up Cannonier enough to get that victory. I would like to see run back, because I think it went unanimous, but I think Cannonier put a lot of damage in there in that fight. I really think he made it competitive, but this time around, I don't see the takedowns being as big a deal. I think these are just two guys that hit hard, and they're going to get right after it. Dominic Reyes is kind of, to me, looking for a win over a quality opponent. Enter Jared Cannonier. And Jared Cannonier, I think, is trying to, again, kind of almost has to reestablish himself, because even though I think that fight was close against Jan Blachowicz, he still lost, and it was still a unanimous decision. And obviously Blachowicz, just beat Jimmy Manos. So Blachowicz right now is on a very high uptick. So it's not a bad loss for Jared, but it is a loss to one of the top guys in the division. So if Cannonier can come out here, get a victory over a guy who's been beating everybody and beating them silly, I think this would be a big deal, especially when you add in the height difference. Just body-wise, I think this would be a good win for Jared Cannonier. So I'm super excited for this one. I think, again, I mentioned the Barzola and Davis could be fight of the night, but this one also might be my second pick for fight of the night. You know what? I'll take it over the Davis one. I think this one has probably a higher chance of finishing. But a lot of fun fights on this card. I think this is a very, very underrated card. All right. Alexa Grasso versus Tatiana Suarez. On paper, you would think Tatiana Suarez would be the favorite, if I'm being honest, despite the lower ranking. That's because Suarez has very good grappling skills. But a lot of people say, oh, Suarez is a really big matchup. She's a really big girl. But actually, Alexa Grasso is like the same size. So for all that talk of, Suarez being such a big strawweight, Alexa Grasso is the same size. However, doesn't have quite the wrestling skills that Suarez is, and I really think that's the key. The longer this stays standing, there's been nothing so far in the 6 fights Suarez has had in his career, or in her career, or even the 2 so far she's had in the UFC, where I'm like, yeah, this is a competent striker. Alexa Grasso is very much a competent striker. Now, even though it's not in Mexico, she does speak Spanish, so you'd imagine somewhat of a kinship there against the American and Suarez. But despite losing to Felice Herrig in February of last year, a fight that was very close, but Felice definitely won that one, Grasso came back and had a very gritty, tough performance against Randa Marcos. And Randa Marcos is a fighter I would consider definitely more of a grappling-heavy fighter. I don't know if she's quite as good as Tatiana Suarez at grappling, but I think that was a very good test for Alexa Grasso against Randa Marcos, heading into somebody with the skill set of Tatiana Suarez. It really shows how hard you got to work to stop the takedown. So if Alexa Grasso can keep this standing, she should have no problem outstriking Tatiana Suarez. But if it goes to the ground, that's Tatiana's world. I don't know if she can get a submission, but she can very much control the fight and ride out a victory. So that's really what you got to look for in this fight, and that's really how I see this fight playing out, as either a grinding decision by Suarez or a nice sprawl and brawl strike fest by Alexa Grasso. Main event of the evening, Damian Maia against Kamaru Usman. Honestly, I feel like this fight's going to be very similar to Damian Maia's last fight against Colby Covington, taking on another big, strong wrestler, and also a guy that has a little striking. I would say Kamaru Usman's striking might even be ahead of Colby Covington's, to be honest. And Damian Maia obviously has never been a guy that's been great at stand-up fighting. We all know he's a multi-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion, but Jiu-Jitsu, again, doesn't mean you're going to be the best at takedowns. And so his last couple fights, Damian Maia's ran into some very strong wrestlers, guys he hasn't been able to take down, and conversely, he's lost his last 2 fights. I think he's fighting as someone who's pretty much in that same mold in Kamaru Usman. And obviously, Damian Maia, he's already talked about retirement. He's already talked about how, he only has a few fights left. He is going to finish out his contract, but I think for this stage in Maia's career, I think this is a bad matchup for him. This is a guy who I don't think he can just easily take down, easily, use a lot of those jiu-jitsu wizard skills that we're known for. And standing up, I don't really see much that he can do against Kamaru Usman, who I think has just been getting better and better since he won the Ultimate Fighter. So, yeah, Damian Maia can still submit him. I'm not ruling that out. He can do that against anybody. He can submit anybody, maybe in just about any weight class. But I think he's going to have a tough time really getting a dominant position against the guy as big, as strong, and as good of a wrestler as Kamaru Usman. I really do. I think this is going to be a tough fight for Maia. Good on him for taking this fight. Obviously, he was not the originally scheduled opponent for Usman, so good on him for taking this fight. Got to give him credit, but I don't think this is the best matchup for the former two-time title challenger. All right, with that said, let me get to my picks here for UFC Chile, coming to you live this Saturday, May 19th from Santiago, Chile, 10 p.m. on the East Coast, 7 p.m. on the West Coast. And for our friends in the UK, I believe that is coming to you live at, if I did my math correctly, 3 in the morning? Don't quote me on that, but I think 3 in the morning. All right. First fight of the evening, welterweight division, Vincente Luque against Chad Laprise. I think this is a great fight, great matchup. Definitely two guys I think are looking to break out in the very always stacked welterweight division. But I'm going to go Vincente Luque. I think his jiu-jitsu skills might be a little bit of an X factor and come standing. And I think those transitions from standing to grappling, I would go with Vincente. So I'm going to take him in this fight. But I wouldn't be surprised if Laprise won. Veronica Macedo against Andrea KGB Lee. I've talked with Andrea several times over the years. I would consider to be a fan of hers. But this is a good matchup for her, despite being a while since Andrea has fought. Taking on also someone who hasn't fought in a while, who has never fought at this weight class. And, you know, I'm not really sure what brings to the table, because she fought someone who she probably was always going to lose to in Ashley Evans Smith. So I'm not really sure how good Veronica Macedo is. There's not enough for me to really go on and really kind of hammer in. So she might be able to surprise some people in this fight. I don't know. But I feel like there's a lot of question marks there. And so that's why I check the box for Andrea KGB to win her UFC debut. Diego Rivas against Guido Canetti. Go Diego Rivas. I think you know, the youth and fighting in his home country, I think is going to be a really big deal. Canetti's another guy who's, you know, had some trouble staying healthy, but he's now 38. I wonder how much is really left there for him. So I'm going to go with Diego Rivas in this one. Jared Cannonier against Dominic Reyes. I'm going to go Jared Cannonier, actually. I do think this is very much a pick'em fight. I think either guy has the power to knock out each other. But I think Cannonier, you know, has a little more of the grappling ability, and I could maybe see that kind of playing into this factor. So I say just for that reason, I'm going with Cannonier. Alexa Grasso against Tatiana Suarez. I'm going to go Alexa Grasso. I know that may be chalk, but I think Suarez is a very good grappler, but she's not as well-rounded as Alexa Grasso. And I think that last fight, seeing Grasso deal with someone who's very aggressive and trying to get the fight to the ground in Randa Marcos, I feel is a nice kind of, not stepping stone, but a nice kind of preview or warm-up for taking on somebody like Suarez. So I think Alexa Grasso, I think her last two fights, she's learned a lot about herself and her career. So I'm going to go with Alexa Grasso in this one. And I kind of gave my pick away, but I'm picking in the breakdown. But I'm going with Kamaru Usman. I think this is just a bad matchup for Damian Maia. You know, he's taken on two very strong wrestlers with some decent stand-up in his last two fights in Colby Covington and Tyron Woodley. And I think he's facing another guy in that almost that exact same mold. And obviously Kamaru Usman is a guy who's looking to make a name for himself. Who better to beat than a former two-time world title challenger, and doing so in the main event of a UFC card. So I think that'd be a very big deal if Usman got by Maia, but I think he's going to do so, the Nigerian Nightmare. So those are my picks. Again, thanks to earlier for Kayla Baity joining me. Again, you can follow her on Twitter, Instagram at fangirl_MMA. I'm your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in on MMA UK. That's MMAUK.net and Facebook.com/WeAreMMAUK. And, of course, right here on MMA World, Facebook.com/MMA World, where we come live each and every week, recapping and breaking down the biggest and best fights in the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports as a whole. So, for KLA, I'm your host, Jim Gramm. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Beyond the Cage. Goodbye, everybody.